All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 30 of the online Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class. Today, as it says, I was originally going to go over hot number 3, the Flexbox test. I've got it. I could bring it up right now, but unfortunately, a couple people in the class still have not turned the test in. So if you want to get some points for it, you of course will lose points because that was given over a week ago. All right. But I will go over it Wednesday morning, first thing. And if you have not turned it in by then, you'll get a permanent 0. There's not really any more I can do about it. And as it says here, speaking of tests, I got a few things to say about them. First of all, last week, I had people who were sending me emails that were saying they were having a little bit of trouble understanding Bootstrap. So what I did was I kind of made a template you could use for either the one-page site or the first page of the 3-page site. But I've got people who have been sending me emails saying, well, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I thought this was a code along exercise. I never said that. All right. I've tried to give you some help. So if you had a hard time understanding it, you'd have something to use. But no, it was not meant to be a code along exercise. And along with that too, I mean, I'm getting emails from between a quarter to a third of the class almost weekly. I'm behind. I've got this going on in my life. I've got this going on in my life. And we all do. And I don't mean it all to say I understand anybody's situation. I don't. Just like you don't understand my situation. And the thing is though, you know, when things are due and I give you a certain date that they're due, not to be funny, but they're due on that date. That means, can you turn them in late? Typically, yes, but you will lose points. How many points will you lose? It depends on how late you turn it in. There's a big difference between turning in something the day after it's due, as opposed to turning it in 2 weeks after it's due. All right. I try to be fair. I try to give some points when I can. And sometimes people will come back and they'll say, well, what you did is unfair. That's your right to think that. All right. Remember, one thing that you will all get, I believe, the last week of class, so somewhere around 2 months from now, approximately December 9th, you where you are going to be doing a course evaluation. And I've said this before, it's a 3-pronged evaluation. You will evaluate the course. Did it meet all of the objectives that were shown in the syllabus? You will evaluate the book, or books in our case. Did they do a good job of teaching you the material? And you will do a good job, or you will do a job of evaluating me, the instructor. And that's your chance. I don't ever see what you've written. So if you think I've been unfair, that's your time to put it down. All right. If you think no, that it's been set up pretty well, you can put that down. All right. Now, what we're going to do in just a few minutes then is we're going to start on the JavaScript book. I'm going to actually lecture on 3 chapters today. And now that may sound like a whole heck of a lot, but what you're going to notice is in chapter 1, most of the material is what we had in chapter 1 of the HTML book. All right. So we will, like I said, we'll go over chapters 1, 2, and 3. Then we'll talk about what homework you have to do and what homework you don't have to do. I'm not even going to go over that paragraph right now. We'll talk about it when we get done with chapters 1, 2, and 3. All right. Tomorrow, then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over, and I'm going to try to do this for every chapter in the book. All right. There are these things called short exercises, and you'll notice there's 1, 2, 3 of them for the first 3 chapters. And there's another one called extra exercises. And you notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those for chapters 1 through 3. All right. With that said, you don't do There we go. All right. What I plan on doing is going over all of these short exercises and extra exercises and building all of them. Do you have to turn those in? No. Do you have to build them along with me? No. Some people find that it's easier to learn that when I'm doing something, they like to code along. Other people think, no, I'd rather watch you and then go back and look at it and try it myself later, or look at the video later or whatever. That's going to be totally up to you. All right. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow then, is we're going to go over these three programs or these three things right here. And then we're going to go over these 4 or 5 or whatever it is right here. But again, you will not, I repeat, you will not have to turn those in. All right. So why am I going over them? Because I want you to learn how to program. All right. And there are going to be things you are going to have to turn in. We'll talk about those in a little bit. All right. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to give you, believe it or not, a pretest on chapters 1, 2, and 3. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, the pretest is harder than your test. By the time we get to Thursday and you are taking your first test, yes, that'll be your first hands-on test in here. All right. But by the time you get there, you might think, if you understand what I go over for the pretest, you should be able to do the test probably in 15 minutes to a half an hour. It's really and truly not a hard test. All right. Then just so you've got a clue as to what's going on, next week we'll probably do pretty much the same thing with chapters 4 and 5, then with 6 and 7. All right. The following week, etc. All right. We will actually go through all the chapters that are in this book, all 18 of them. Now, with that said, you're not going to be responsible for all the work in all 18 chapters. Okay. And I just wanted to show you this. Again, there are, where are you here? There are 18 chapters in the book. With that said, will we go over all 18 chapters? Probably. Will you be responsible for the material in all 18 chapters? No. And how many will you be responsible for, etc.? I guess for that, the best answer I can give you is we'll see as we get going. Definitely you'll be responsible for everything in chapters 1 through 7 and 8 through 11. After that, we're going to see where we are in the semester. I'm going to go over these chapters here, and you'll be responsible for some of that material. I'm going to go over these examples probably around the beginning of December, but you won't be responsible for anything in 17, 18, or 19. You won't be responsible for any written test, you're responsible for any homework or labs or anything, and you won't be tested on it. So why then am I going to go over that? Because some of you who are in this class right now, the next class that you will take, or maybe the next class that you will take, I don't know, in spring will be AWD1000. And that's what the stuff that's in here, especially chapter 19, is all about. That's why we're going over them. All right. Okay. So that said, we look here, this is what we're going to talk about today. Chapter 1, Introduction to Web Development. And as I mentioned, much of the material that's in chapter 1, you already know. Chapter 1 in this book is very similar to chapter 1 in the HTML book that we went over a couple months ago. But there are a few things that are in here in this chapter that are not in the other one. All right, so we'll go over all that stuff. Then we'll go into chapter 2. Then we'll go into chapter 3. All right, after I get done with that, then what I want to explain to you is what is going to be due for homework, because it's a little bit confusing. So we will take some time to go over it. As always, if something doesn't make sense to you, if you're like, well, do we have to do this? Am I right with this? Email me. That's the best thing I can tell you. All right. and I will be happy to answer your email as quickly as I can and to let you know as quickly as possible what's going on. All right, so let's jump into chapter 1 here. Again, you can see, as it says, it's an introduction to web development. So when you look here, all right, the first half of the chapter we've already had. How a web app works, yeah, we had it. This ECMA spec, we'll talk about it. It's not really that important, really and truly is not. But then we'll look, and right away, we'll look at our first JavaScript application. Now, it probably won't totally make sense to you. The good news is the application that we're going to look at, you've got all of the code for it already. All right. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding JavaScript to the HTML and to the CSS we've already been working with. Then notice what's next. HTML skills, this is what you had earlier. CSS skills, this is what you had earlier. So what's new in here is going to be these 3 or 4 pages of JavaScript, and then this how to test a JavaScript application, 3 or 4 more pages, and here's how to work with Visual Studio. All right. So again, much of the material that's in here, you will have already had. All right. I will go over all of it just to be complete. All right. But I'm going to concentrate most heavily on the new stuff, the JavaScript stuff. All right. So let's just jump in and look at that. Now, you saw this picture a long time ago. This is what a web application is all about. And, sometimes you hear the cloud, this is in the cloud, this is in the cloud. That is the internet. All right. So the idea is if you've got a very simple web application, this is kind of what you'll do. In other words, whether you are, let's say that you go out to rankin.edu. It doesn't matter if you go there from a laptop or desktop, from a tablet, or from your phone. What's going to happen when you just go out to rankin.edu is that web server is going to return you the HTML that makes up the homepage for the Rankin Technical College website. All right. And it's pretty static. In other words, there's a real good chance that if you look at that page today and you look at that page a week from today, it'll probably look just, if not exactly the same, very similar. So when will that page change? Well, I mean, think about it. Probably it'll change sometime in December because they'll be trying to get people to come in and register for the spring semester. All right. It probably changed sometime this summer where it went from the fall, the summer semester and the spring semester to the fall semester. But with a fairly simple web application like this, okay, it's fairly static. In other words, it doesn't change often. And that's what they're kind of showing right here. I'm not going to read any of this stuff to you. All right. We've talked about everything that's in here already. You may or may not agree, but we have. We've hit on everything that you see on this screen right here. All right. So again, static web pages, typically what they're saying here is they involve just a single web server. Whatever you ask for, boom, that web server returns it to you. Now, the way this is going to change with what we're starting today is with this HTTP request. All right, we'll still get a response, and it says with HTML, and that's true. But think about it. Again, not to bore you here, but if I go out to this, if I go out to rankin.edu, all right, I think everybody who's in here would agree, and I don't know how I got to there, but I did. I think everybody who's in here would agree that when you look at this, there has to be some CSS in there someplace. Otherwise, it wouldn't look, it's a little jumbled anyway. But, you couldn't do stuff like this and get drop-down menus, etc. So there's some CSS in there. The only reason I'm saying that to you, all right, the only reason that I'm saying that to you is right here, at what they're showing is true. It is an HTTP response you get back with HTML, but it also includes CSS. What's going to be added now, and you'll see this in just a page or two in the book, is yeah, not only will it be HTML, not only will it be CSS, but it'll also be JavaScript. That's going to bring some interactivity into our web page that we didn't have previously. So as they say there, a static web page is one that's stored on the web server and doesn't change. I don't agree with that. I would say doesn't change often. All right. It can change. It does change. Because I can guarantee you that going out to Rankin's website like I just did, that it hasn't been like that, ever since they've had the website up. They make changes to it. So again, it is important though that you understand you make an HTTP or hypertext transfer protocol request, you get back an HTTP or hypertext transfer protocol response. That response will have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in it. All right. Now, when they talk about dynamic pages, what are they talking about then? All right. What are they literally talking about with dynamic pages? All right. There is, again, some interactivity. So in other words, typically what's going to happen is the web server itself, the main web server that you hit when you type in an HTTP request, will not be able to totally satisfy whatever it is you're looking for. In other words, it'll have to go out and call another server or servers. They will do their job and they will send that information back to the main web server, which will send back an HTTP response. All right. Now, one of the things that's in there with it, you see that we really don't go over in here is what's called a database server. All right. If you think about it, all right, if I'm creating something, I don't even care what it is. But if I'm creating something, let's say that I want to go and copy an image. All right. I take that image and I save it into a file. It might be a .jpeg file or a .png file or a .gif or something else, but I'm saving it into a file. All right. Well, the thing is about that file, unless I go back in and change the image and have it point to a different image, or I change the size of the image, or I just really, that's static. That file won't change. All right. In fact, if you do look on here, that picture that they've had here, I think it's this one, has been there for a long time on their website. All right. So who cares? I mean, why am I even telling you this? Well, typically over time, things will change. Imagine for a second, all right, it might be kind of hard right now, but imagine for a second that you were running a website and that website not only had, a lot of stuff on there, like we've seen for Rankin's website or whatever, but you also had, let's say, a little e-commerce store there where you sold things. So somebody, I mean, we actually have that at Rankin. You can go out to the bookstore part and you can buy sweatshirts and hats and whatever. Well, that stuff is not going to be static. It's going to be transient. In other words, if I've got 5 hats, 5 Rankin Technical College baseball hats in stock, and somebody goes in and buys 3 of them, well, I better go in and decrement my number of hats I have down to 2. And maybe when I reach a certain point, I say, you know what, I better order more hats. The reason I'm telling you that is that's where a database comes in. So if you want to be able to do something dynamically and be able to change things on the fly, that's where the database comes in. Now, those of you that this is your first class, the AWD1000 class is your first class. Next semester, you will take AWD1100, which is C# programming. In that class, towards the end of the semester, we do work somewhat with databases. All right. If your next class is going to be AWD 1111, Database Driven Website Development 1, if you take that class in spring, we work a lot in there with databases. There are 2 different kinds of databases that we work with. All right. And don't worry about it. All I'm just trying to do is just show you in here. That's the dynamicity. All right. And again, what we're talking about in here is not just HTML. but HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right. So that's kind of what they're getting into in here. I'm not totally following script for what they're saying in the book. All right. But then they talk about how JavaScript can be used. Now, it's really important that you realize the class that you are in right now, this class, we are talking about JavaScript on what's called the client side. We are total client side processing in here. All right. What's the difference? Well, rather than client side, you can use JavaScript also for server side processing. One of the things we talked about right now, we talked about this earlier, is you now know how to go out and create an HTML form. But if you go and click a submit button, typically nothing is going to happen because we haven't told anything to happen. You learn how to make things happen when you work with JavaScript on the server side. All right. Other stuff that you can do in here, and they show you a little bit of it here. All right. They mention, for example, an image swap. All right. Or maybe even a rollover. But here's an example. This is the Lands End outlet. And this is showing the shirt. It looks like, I don't know, in black or blue, whatever that is. And if you click this right here, it's going to change the color of your shirt. Same kinds of things in here. But the idea behind this is it's doing it in real time. In other words, as soon as you come in there and click the button, it's going to change something. All right. So this is, you are doing things dynamically. All right. And again, where they're showing where JavaScript fits into this. All right. And I don't know why they don't show CSS in here, but they don't. So some of the things that we're going to learn about JavaScript and jQuery, data validation. Most of that is going to involve working with forms. All right. And how you can validate your forms. We've done a little bit of form validation. We've used things like the required attribute. We looked a little bit in here at regular expressions, etc. But we're going to look at that stuff in much more depth and breadth of coverage and how it pertains to JavaScript. Image swaps, I've already shown you, right? I just mentioned it up above. And rollovers, all right? You'll do a rollover where typically, you take your mouse and you put it here and the image changes to something else. You put your mouse out and then it changes back to what it was originally. That's typically the way you do a rollover. Slideshows, we've looked a little bit at slideshows, all right, as far as how you can do them with Bootstrap, but you can set up slideshows with JavaScript as well. Many people do. So as they say on the bottom of the page here, JavaScript is a scripting language. I don't want people to think, just because it's got the word scripting in there, that it's not a programming language. JavaScript is a programming language. It is probably either the #1 most desired language in the world, or it's at least in the top 3. If you told me it's #1, I wouldn't be at all surprised. Notice it's run by the JavaScript engine of a web browser, and it controls the operation of the browser. So in other words, if you bought a computer within the last probably 25 years, the JavaScript engine has been included. All right. As it says here, when the browser requests an HTML page with JavaScript or a link to an external JavaScript file, they're both loaded into the browser, again, along with the CSS. All right. It says there, because JavaScript runs on the client, not the server, its functions don't require a trip back to the server. Again, it says because JavaScript runs on the client and not on the server. In this class, JavaScript will run solely on the client and not on the server. If you remember, I'm not going to go back to it, but what I showed you when we started and looked at this book, and I showed you the chapters, chapter 19, which is the last chapter in this book, is on JavaScript on the server. That's how they end the book. All right. Finally, when we get to like it's chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11, I believe, we'll look at jQuery. jQuery, as they mentioned, is a JavaScript library. All right. It's the last number that I heard is if you looked at the top 100,000 websites in the world, that jQuery was used extensively or at least somewhat in over 80% of them. All right. But again, we could just cut this down to jQuery is JavaScript. So once you start to learn JavaScript, when you get to working with jQuery, it's just another tool in your JavaScript tool belt, so to speak. All right. Now, kind of confuses people, and I just want to explain something. And I may have explained this before, I may not have, I don't know. But one of the sites that I've gone to with you many times in this class has been W3 Schools. All right. And the reason I'm mentioning that is when you go to W3 Schools, what W3 is it's www. It's the World Wide Web, but there it's the World Wide Web Consortium. All right. What W3 does is they come up and they decide things that are going to happen with HTML and with CSS, but they can't order a browser and say, hey, do this starting tomorrow. Hey, do this. So what the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, does, all right, is they make what are known as recommendations. And what happens is literally probably 99.9% of the time, if not more, is the browser manufacturers say, yep, we'll start doing this. We'll start doing this, in 2 months, or we'll start doing this in 3 weeks or whatever. All right. So who cares? Why am I even telling you that? Because the W3C pretty much is the oversight thing for HTML and CSS. It is not the oversight for JavaScript. The oversight for JavaScript is ECMA. ECMA, if you look right there, that's actually what JavaScript was originally called, was ECMAScript. ECMA is an acronym. It stands for European Computer Manufacturing Association. That's actually the governing body of JavaScript. Now, why is that important? It's important for one reason. If you look at the changes that have been made to HTML, there have actually probably over the last 10 years have not been a lot of them. If you look at the changes for CSS over the last 10 years, I don't know if there's been any. But what ECMA does is almost every year they come out with a bunch of new stuff that didn't previously exist. So unlike the W3C, ECMA basically upgrades the language typically on an annual basis. All right, they give you the history. I'm not going to go through it. If you're interested, read it. All right. But what used to happen in here is it was always known as like ES5, ES6, but now typically they have the year after it. All right, like ES 2020, and there is an ES 2023. All right. So some of the stuff that they've done in the previous versions, I can go over this with you, but it probably will make little to no sense to you. All right. You're going to learn what strict mode is. You're going to learn what JSON is. You're going to learn what arrays are and what objects are. Now, to read this stuff, it's not going to probably help you too much because we haven't talked about very much of the stuff that's in here, if anything. All right. So browser support for ECMAScript. Basically, every modern browser supports ECMAScript. That's the best thing I can tell you. Remember earlier in the semester, I had shown you that website, caniuse.com. All right. And you can go out there and look and put in not just HTML features, not just CSS features, but you can typically put in most JavaScript features as well, to see whether or not the browser supports that feature. All right. the components of a JavaScript application. So let's look at this for the first time. All right. One thing to notice if you look on your screen right now is, in my opinion at least, of course, I can always be wrong, but when I look at this screen and I look at that picture, I don't think any CSS has been applied to that file. All right. The it just kind of looks like a jumbled mess. The H1 tag, probably what that is at the top that says, please join our email list. That looks okay. All right. But when you look at it, you can say, well, the labels are lined up. They're all left justified. And that's true. But the actual text boxes that are in there are not lined up at all. All right. There's not much space. Everything is kind of junked together, etc. So as they say on the top, there's the file before some CSS has been applied to it. But the point is this, you should be able to read everything that's in here and it should make sense to you. So let's talk about the one thing that might not make sense. Okay. If you look on your screen right now, you'll notice that after email address, after confirm email address, and after first name, there's an asterisk. All right. What that is showing is all of those fields in this form are required. All right. They're all required. So you have to put something in those boxes. All right. And if you don't, what's going to happen is the asterisk will go away and it'll be replaced over here or over here or over here with an error message. But if you put something in here, let's say it's a valid email. So let's say I put right here, jpscott@rankin.edu. And over here, I put in jpscott@rankin.edu. And here I put in Jeff. And I click join list. Then what'll happen is all of these asterisks will go away and they'll be replaced with nothing, meaning that what I put in there was valid. All right. Now, it could push me to another page that says, well, email list. You saw this when we did something like that with the Halloween store. All right. If I come in here, and let's say I'm not paying attention. So I come in here and I put in Jeff. I come in here and I put in Scott. And I come in here and I put in my email address. And I'm like, oh, geez, that's not what I was supposed to do. Then when I click the clear form button, that should disappear. That whatever was in there should disappear. Whatever is in there should disappear. Whatever is in there should disappear. And at the end, those should all be set back again to asterisks. That's what you're going to be learning how to do. All right. So I'm not going to talk about the HTML. I'm not going to talk about the CSS because once they put it in, now it looks like this. Looks a lot nicer. All right. Sometimes you'll even see after this H1, you'll have maybe an H2 or an H3 below it, and it'll say fields marked with an asterisk are required. All right. So why didn't they do that here? Well, every field is required. All right. But, sometimes it just makes it easier for people to understand. Some people look at those asterisks and boom, they can just understand what it means. Other people, maybe not. All right. So again, they've added the CSS. I'm not going to talk about the CSS. Take a look at it. All right. But what is new is this. And I want to spend a couple minutes on this page right here. It says the figure on the next page, this is what you're going to see, is the application looks in a browser to see if there's anything there that was put in incorrectly. All right. If there's anything in there that's been put in incorrectly, meaning either you left a field out, or for those fields that were in here, these two fields are supposed to match one another. So if you left any of them blank, or if you've got one thing in this field and another thing in this field, you want to let the user know, right? And that's what they're talking about in here. So those asterisks will change to error messages. All right. Notice this paragraph now that's now right near the top. It says, When JavaScript changes the HTML for a page, it's called DOM scripting. I think it's about chapter 6. We're going to have a whole chapter on the DOM. The DOM is the document object model. We looked at it a little bit in the other book. Basically, it's something that gets created behind the scenes whenever you create a web page. All right. And learning how to program the DOM, if you can become a proficient DOM scripter or DOM programmer, all right, you're going to be a wanted commodity because not everybody can do it. All right. So this is what you're going to look at. Also, if you look here, it says the figure shows the JavaScript for the application. It says, since you're going to learn how all this code works over the next 6 chapters, it says you might want to skip over it right now. I'm going to give it to you anyway, but it'll be kind of light. In other words, there'll be things in here that you probably won't be totally able to understand, and that's okay. All right, such as, well, as it says here, the code is going to consist of 4 functions that consists of blocks of code. What the heck is a function? Well, I always give this example, and it may be a good one, it may not be. But when I was going to college the first time, when I was going for my 4-year degree, all right, I was working at a food store at the same time. That was back in the days when you had a produce worker who weighed your stuff for you, etc. And that's what I did. The reason I'm telling you that, and I'm going to make this short and sweet. A guy came in, a customer. He was an older guy. We talked once in a while. He was a very nice guy. And I was looking for a place to live. All right, I wanted to move out. I was not getting along well with my roommates, so I wanted to move out. Well, somehow he and I got to talking about this. And he said, hey, Jeff, if you're ever interested, he said, I own a house that's about 10 minutes from here. And my house is literally got a house in back of it. I call it my dollhouse. It's got 1 bedroom, a small living room, a small kitchen, and it's a bathroom. But if you go downstairs, there's a shower down there. All right. Well, long story short, I ended up renting the place from the guy for about a year. And sometimes I'd come home because I'd be at college all day long. I'd immediately go from there to my job, and then I'd come home. And sometimes I'd come home and the place would be a pig pen. And I kind of trick myself and I'd say, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to separate it. I'm going to go in and first I'm going to clean the bedroom. Then when I get done, I'm going to clean the bathroom. Then when I get done, I'm going to clean the living room. Then when I get done, I'm going to clean the kitchen, etc. What I was doing was I was taking my job and breaking it down into a bunch of sub jobs. That's what functions are. All right. They basically take whatever it is you're trying to do and you break it down into tasks. All right. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. So again, I'm going to explain to you what's going on in those tasks, but probably it won't make a boatload of sense right now. And again, that's okay. All right. Now they mention here down towards the bottom of the page, says what's different about JavaScript is that it provides methods and properties that let you modify the DOM. All right. That's one of the strengths of JavaScript is that it allows you to modify the DOM. You are going to learn to do this. We're going to do a lot of this as we move on. So when you look in here, notice we've got now 2 error messages. The first error message is because what we put in the confirm email address doesn't match what's in the email address. The second error message is we put nothing in that first name text box. You can know, if you notice there, they are different messages, but they're both error messages. All right. And this is what we're going to take a look at. First thing to notice, if we go down a little further, is this line right here. This is very similar to the link tag that we put in to bring in a CSS file. And what I mean is our JavaScript in this case is going to be in a separate file. all right, that will end with an extension of .js. JavaScript files end with a .js extension in the same way that when we worked with CSS files, they ended with a .css extension. All right. Not only that, just like I had you create a CSS folder for your CSS files, we will now be creating a JS folder for our JavaScript files. All right. Okay. So here's the code. And like I said, it may make very little sense. And if it does, please don't let that worry you. All right. This first line right here, we may have mentioned this in an earlier class. I don't remember. This is what I call an alias. This says every time we use the $sign, we will be using the $sign instead of saying document.querySelector. So all that is an alias. It's much nicer to type one character than it is to type probably around 20 characters. All right. So again, that's all this is. All right. Now, when we look at the rest of the stuff, like I said, what it's doing in here is it is checking each one of the fields to see if it's violated anything that you're supposed to be doing and you didn't do. These lines right here, these three lines that you see right here. All right, I can try to highlight them. It doesn't highlight very well on here, but these three lines, all right, with those three lines, that is basically saying take whatever was in here and in here and in here, and I want to be able to look at them. So what we're doing right there is we're creating what are called variables. All right, we're creating variables. So we create one variable called email1. We create one variable called email2, and we create one variable called first name. And all we're doing is we're saying grab the value of whatever was put into that text box, the first one, and put it into email1. Grab whatever value was put in the second text box and put it in email2. Grab whatever value was put into the third text box and put it into first name. All right. You'll notice that before each one of those, it's got the word const. All right. What that means is we're not going to allow the user in this case to change the values that are put in there. Well, it's okay because somebody put something in there. You can say, well, what if they put in something wrong? They can change it. But while I'm checking what they've currently put in there, it can't be changed. What you're going to find is what we're going to put before these variable names right here, virtually every time is either the word const, which means they're constant, or the word let, L-E-T, which means they can be changed. Now, the recommendation is that you use const whenever possible. This is the time when it is possible. There will be other times, and we'll get those on, it's not possible. You don't want to use const. So again, this is just something that you'll work with and that you'll understand as we go on in here. All right. Then next, now what we're doing in here, we're validating. All right. We're assuming that everything that was put in here was correct. So we've got what's called a Boolean variable right there. And that Boolean variable is called is valid. So we're assuming everything in there is valid. Notice the word let in there. That means it is possible to change is valid from true to false. All right, we wouldn't want to say const right there. We'd have problems if we did that. So we're assuming everything is okay. Then we're coming in here and we're making 3 or 4 checks. We're saying, hey, if there's nothing in that first text box, if there's been nothing put in there, then what I want to do is I want to change that asterisk to have it say email is required. And now, since it isn't valid, you know, I was supposed to put something in there and I didn't. All right. So if that's the case, set is valid. That was true. Set it to false. Was something in there, then it'll hit this else right here. And it won't do anything other than It'll remove whatever, so there'll be no asterisk. There'll be nothing after this. Then we do a similar thing, but it's not the same. All right, we don't check with the second email. We don't check to see if it's empty or not. We check to see if it's the same thing as the first one. So that's why, like you saw in here, we have grace@yahoo.com, and here we just have grace@yahoo. They're not the same. That's why in this example, we got the emails must match. That's this right here. All right. And you'll also notice we're setting email to false here, and we're setting it here, and we're setting it here. So it may already be false, but I'm just setting it again. We don't know the order in which somebody is going to fill out this form. You might say, well, they're going to do this one, then they're going to do this one, then they're going to, who says they have to do it in that order? Nobody. All right. So if I put nothing in any of these, if I put nothing in here, nothing, all right, then I'm going to get here, email is required. It's going to check here. If they're both empty, they actually do match, so nothing will print there. But for this one, I'll have first name is required. So you can see here when we left that one blank, we got the first name is required. There's no error right here. I could just come in here and put in the word hello, because we're not checking to see if it's a valid email. We're just checking to see if there's something in there. So if I put hello in there and I put hello in there, they do match. We're not checking for a valid email. We're just checking to see if there was something put into that text box. All right, so here we're checking our 3 text boxes. Then we come down to the bottom here. And what we're saying, and that looks a little bit confusing, all right, if, and then in the parentheses, we've got an exclamation point is valid. That's a shortcut. This line that you see right here, this line, that line, is the same thing as saying if is valid equal false. All right, that means that if I set this thing, that Boolean variable that was called is valid, if I set it to false, I don't want anything to happen. What the heck does that mean? Well, when you click a button, by default, that's supposed to run the submit routine. Boom, that's supposed to run the clear routine. But what I'm saying is, if is valid was not true, and it wouldn't be true here because we have errors, don't do anything. So this EVT prevent default, what that's saying is, hey, what would normally happen here, what would normally happen is I'd run a submit routine. Don't do that. Don't do anything, for lack of better words. All right. But when we come in here, here is the rest of the code. Well, this is clearing the form right here. This is clearing out those 3 text boxes. So if I press that clear form button, that'll clear out the 3 text boxes. This is setting what comes after each text box to those red asterisks. All right. And then this, the dot focus says, take my mouse and put it in the first field. All right. Now, probably the hardest part is this part right here. All right. I mean, remember the first time I looked at this, it's like, what the heck is all this stuff? Well, document is our web page. All right. Add event listener says, hey, we want to do something. And event listener says to the system, to the program, hey, look and see if you can, if this happens. All right. So when the DOM is created, in other words, it's been loaded, these 2 lines right here, this may sound confusing what I'm about to say to you with these 2 lines, but it actually totally makes sense. All right. What they say is, hey, if I click the button that's called join list, I want you to run that join list that I showed you just a minute ago. And if I click the button called clear form, I want you to run this. It's not telling it to run it. It's telling it if you click this button, then run this. If you click this button, run this. That's it. Now, I gave you that in 10, 15 minutes or whatever, and it might have made very, very, very little sense. And I actually, believe it or not, that's okay. Because we're going to start off very slow in here. It's the old, what I've told you before, the crawl, walk, run type of mentality. All right, and that's what we're going to do. Now, I'm not going to go over how to use the HTML5 semantic elements because we've talked about all these before. All right, you should be able to look at something like this, a page that's structured with this stuff, and know what this is. All right, that was the first part of the class. Now with div and span, all right, we're going to be using div and span quite a bit in our code. All right, span, you may or may not have noticed it, and I really didn't mention it to you. All those asterisks that we put in were all put in as spans, all those red asterisks. And again, if that doesn't make sense, just bear with me because we're going to keep looking at it and keep looking at it and keep looking at it. All right. But we're going to be, like I said, doing a lot of work with divs, some work with spans. All right. And what they say here is if you go back and you look at what's typically referred to as legacy CSS code, I'm sorry, legacy HTML code, all right, which means, code from, 10, 15, 20 years ago, people did everything with divs. Everything that they did was in divs, and much of it still is. But today, again, we've got those semantic elements, articles, sections, the main, etc. All right, which you should be using now, but there's still millions of lines out there that were written before these semantic elements came to be, and they're not going to be changed. All right, the basic HTML attributes, again, this is all stuff we've talked about. I have got to take for granted that you now know what an ID is, that you now know what a class is. All right, the name isn't that important that's shown right here, neither is the for or the title. But those two, more than anything else, you understand IDs and classes. And again, here's some examples. All right, the CSS skills that you'll need. Again, I have to take for granted that everything that's shown right here, you understand. You understand how to create an external style sheet. You understand that you can come in and put a style tag inside of a page and do that as well. All right. As far as coding the selectors, again, this is all stuff we've talked about before. Style rules, same thing. And I'm not trying to cheat you out of this. All right, why aren't you going through that? This is stuff we've gone over before. All right. It is 9 o'clock. I'm going to give you 10 minutes right now. Then we're going to finish this chapter up and jump into the next one. How to test a JavaScript application. Again, it's just about 9 a.m. rather. All right. So let's come back, please. I'll leave this up there. Come back at 9:10. All right. I'll be back in just a couple minutes. All right, it is 9:10, so I'm going to continue on. Now, they talk next in here about how you can run a JavaScript application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you rather than, showing you to you in the book, I'm going to show it to you in here. So let's see. I believe that someplace in my mess here. All right, so where it says here, let's see, query, student download, book apps, chapter 1, email list. This is the one that we're looking at, right? Okay? So there's different ways that I can run this. First of all, let's talk about it, and let's bring this thing up, and I'll bring it up in code. All right. So this is it in code. So here is our CSS file. Here is our JavaScript file. Now they're not making separate folders like I want us to do, but it's still that's okay. Here is our index file. And if we do fill out everything correctly, this is the file that's going to run that just says, thanks for joining our email list. All right. But to my knowledge, when we come in here and right here, and we go to run this, so I'm going to bring up the index.html. So I'm going to bring it up in live server. And there it is. So you'll notice if I don't fill out anything, all right, wow, it came back and it says, thanks for joining our email list. Well, that appears, it says to me one of two things. Either there's no code checking it, or we're not adding the JavaScript file. But we'll check on that in a minute. Let's see if we come in here and we just put in something. We get the same thing. All right, we can go back and forth. If we come in here and we click clear, it does clear the form. All I'm trying to show you is we can run this from code. That's one way of running it. Okay, let's talk about another way to run it. All right, forgetting about this. So we've got this. We can just double click on our index file and the same thing will happen. So that's another way to run it. All right, let's talk about yet another way of running it. All right, so I think that we can come in here, and I don't know why you'd want to do it like this, but I think you can also come in and literally just take this and open it. All right, I'm going to see what they show in the book because they mentioned there were 4 ways. All right, and what I've shown you, doing it through code or just double clicking on the file, that's what I do 100% of the time, is one way or the other. All right. You develop a JavaScript application, you're usually working on your own computer. To run it, you can use one of the 4 methods. So let's see what they show here. From your browser, use Control-O to open, for the open command. I've never done that in my life. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Use the File Explorer and double click on it. I showed you that. Use the features of your current text editor or IDE. I showed you that. Finally, click on the link in the current web page. So if we created a web, we put something like this in here. All right, click to start the program. We could do that. All right. Then we've talked about this already, the components of the URL. I don't want to do that again. Now, this is going to be a big thing for all of us, and that is using developer tools. All right. Now, you say, oh, yeah, we did that with CSS. Yes, we did, but it's going to be different now. And if you say, what do you mean? I want to show you exactly what I mean. All right. I'm going to purposely put in an error or 2 in here. So first of all, let's pretty this up a little bit. Let's set it up so it's really the way we should do it. In other words, I'm going to create a folder in here called CSS, and I'm going to grab this email.css file and I'm going to put it in there. All right. Then I'm going to create a folder that's going to be called JS, and I'm going to put the email.js file in there. All right. Now, what just happened with that is if I go back into here, this is going to break now. All right, we'll fix it in just a moment, but I want to show you that it's going to break. So if I open it with live server, you can see what happens. Kind of looks the way it did at the beginning of the chapter. It can't find my CSS file. It also can't find, all right, my JavaScript file. That's not working. So let's fix it. We'll see how we'd fix it. First fix is easy. All right, we have to just give it the right path. So we'd have to say CSS/email list. So by doing that, oops, not that. By doing that and then saving it and then running it again with live server, now it's back again where it looks nice. Okay, so that's the first thing. But if I come down here to the bottom, we have to path this as well. So we have to say source equals JS/email list. Now you'll notice that when we did this and we're working with CSS, it's a link tag. And the link tag is known as one of those, basically it's a simple tag and there's no end tag for it. All right. On the other hand, when you use a script tag, you must have both a beginning tag and an end tag for it. All right. Now, when we did images, we would say source equal, and we tell it where the image file was. This is doing the same thing, but we're saying source equal, and we're letting it know where the JavaScript file is. All right. There's nothing else you have to put here. Sometimes you'll see in here, type equal text /JavaScript. All right. That's considered very old school. You might see it on occasion, but it defaults to JavaScript. So whether you put it in there, leave it out, it does the same thing. The other thing, and I mentioned this to you last week, but I want to say it again. Totally fine to put this right at the bottom, right before your ending body tag, but I don't want to put it there. I want to put it up with my link tag. It may or may not work if you do this. But if I change this and add here either defer or I put in async, now it should be just fine. All right. So for years, you would see that all your script tags would be at the bottom. And the reason for that, and this may not make a lot of sense, but the reason it was at the bottom is when you are loading an HTML document, the head loads first, then the body loads. So it would be possible if you put it in here and you didn't have async, that you may load this and you may try to do something before the body's even been loaded. And that could have resulted in error messages. But by saying defer, which is the one I like to use, or async, that's saying, hey, don't literally load this into the memory of the computer until everything in my head and everything in my body has been loaded. All right. So that's usually the way that I do it, is like that. So what we've done now is we've cleaned this up. And what I mean by that is when you look at it, we now have our CSS in a CSS file in a folder, our JavaScript in a JS file in a JS folder. All right. So what's new in here is this. So let's look at this file. This is the same one we looked at earlier. All right. The first thing you see in here is use strict. All right. And that's something that is, I can't even say relatively new anymore because it's about 15 years old. All right. What that does is it says, don't assume anything. All right. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, and you'll probably hear it more than once from me. JavaScript, depending on your point of view, is the best programming language in the world to learn as your first programming language. JavaScript is the worst programming language you can learn first as a programming language. All right. And it's for the same reason. What JavaScript does is if you forget to put in a semicolon where one should be put, 99 times out of 100, it'll still work just fine. I could remove all the semicolons that are in here and the program would still work. All right. It's still considered every line of code that you put in here that's an executable line technically should have a semicolon on the end. Now, the language that you'll learn next semester, those of you who are in the C# class, you must put semicolons at the end of lines. And that's why I'm saying, depending on your point of view, it's either a great thing or not a great thing. Now, what this means is don't assume anything. So another thing JavaScript allows you to do is to go and basically, at least at times, use things before you've even declared them. So I can use a variable even though I never declared the variable. I can be what's called a piss poor programmer. And what I mean by that is I'm doing things I shouldn't do. Use strict means don't allow that to happen. All right, we're going to end up putting that virtually on every program we do. This I mentioned to you before is a shortcut. So since we put this in here, all right, now we can use that $ here and here, etc. If we didn't have this line in here, we would have to come in. Oops, sorry about that. If we didn't have that in there, we'd have to come in and do this. Everywhere you see the $, we'd have to do this. So if we do this, all right, and I can keep going, I'm almost to the bottom now, there's 3 more. So if we do this, then this line becomes moot. In other words, we're not using this line in here anymore. Hopefully you see by just taking a quick look at it, wow, you're saying that instead of typing in all of this stuff right there, I can just do this? And the answer is yes. And most people would tell you then, well, that's what I'm going to do. All right, so I should be able to come in here. Let's see, do a find and search for document.query selector. And I want to replace that. I'm going to come down to here and I want to replace that. Use that here, replace with a $. And this would say replace. I'm just going to do them one at a time. I want to keep the top one in there. That one has to be like this. But hopefully what you saw from that is, wow, that's a lot less typing. It's a shortcut or an alias. All right. Now, the other thing that you're going to notice, and I'm mentioning some stuff here because I'm trying to be complete with you, is this thing right here. All right. That thing right there, hopefully at least you agree, it kind of looks like an arrow. That is literally called an arrow function. Not at the beginning, but as we move through in here, we're going to be taking the way that we write some of, and we're going to be changing it. And the reason that we're going to be doing that is what is recommended today is when possible, you use arrow functions, because again, they typically result in less code. And if you tell me, hey, I'm writing this application and I can write it with 1,000 lines or I can write it with 500 lines, I'm going to choose the 500 lines because I'm the one who has to maintain it after I write it. All right. So I want to make sure it's not being lazy. All right. I just want to give myself the best environment to be able to do things, for lack of better words. So again, as we talked about before, here we're getting those 3 lines. So that is copying everything in from those text boxes into a variable here called email1 for the first one, email2 for the second one, and first name for the third one. Then we're coming down here just like we looked at, and we're saying, we're assuming everything is cool, but we're using let there as opposed to const here. These are not changing. Once the program starts to run, this can change. So we're saying if that first text box was empty, we want to change that asterisk to have it say email is required. And it's not valid anymore because we left something invalid. So we're setting our Boolean variable there from true to false. If we put something in there, something, all we're doing here is we're taking that red asterisk and we're removing it. Then we do a similar type of thing here, but rather than checking for email2 being empty, we're checking and we're saying if the 2 emails, if those 2 text boxes contain different values, then get rid of the asterisk and put in this error and set is valid to false. Otherwise, get rid of the asterisk and set it to nothing. Then, just like we did up here, we're doing the same test here, but for first name. And we're saying if we left it blank, all right, if we left it blank, give us an error and set R is valid to false. Otherwise, set that asterisk to nothing. Then we're saying here, hey, if that is valid as false, so this is a shortcut. This is the same thing as saying if is valid equal false. They mean the same thing, but it's a shortcut. So if is valid is equal to false, don't let anything happen. That's all that's saying. Here we're coming down and we're saying, hey, when we call this routine called clear form, clear out the 3 boxes. So make sure there's nothing in any box. Then go to what comes after those boxes and set those asterisks back again. Finally, put my cursor by the first text box. All right. And then finally in here, all right, this, like I said, was probably the hardest part, were these lines right here. This is saying if I go in and I click the button that has an ID of join list, call the routine call join list. If I click the button on the button with an ID of clear form, call clear form. Those are the same things I just showed you up above, right up here. So again, I should be able to come in here, undo a save all, and I'm going to go back to the index file. Remember, I can only run live server from a .html file. So if I come in here and do this, and I click that, now it's like, well, geez, what the heck happened? I'm not sure. So we have to go back and debug it. But what happens if we put in something here and then we put in something different there? All right. So right now, this isn't operational, is what I'm telling you. Okay. It's going out and it's doing it anyway. There's some kind of an error or something in here. It's not picking up our errors. All right. Why? I'm not sure. We're going to keep looking until we find out why. All right. But I just wanted to run through both in the book and here so you can see what is happening. All right. Now, we're going to look at an example tomorrow, not today, but tomorrow when we start. And we're going to start real slow. To me, this was a very complex example for you to start with. All right. But we're going to start with something simpler. What do I mean? We're going to basically have a text box like you saw in here. But what we'll do is we'll ask the user to enter a number into that text box. Okay. And we'll make sure that that text box is set up as a number field. So you can only put numbers in there. And then we'll click a button and we'll take whatever number you put in there and we'll first check and see if it's 0. If it's 0, that'll be special. But if it's not 0, we'll take that number, whatever it is, and we'll divide it by 2. If we can evenly divide it by 2, we'll print out a message that says that number was even. If it doesn't evenly divide by 2, like 37, we'll say the number's odd. That's what I would have used to start this out with. The example they give is a good example, but it's fairly complex. And I can see where with some people, you'd be like, I don't understand any of this junk. And I don't think I ever will. Everybody can understand it. All right. Some people, of course, will have to work harder than others. All right. Now, if you look in here, okay, if you look in here, I'm gonna go back to here and I'm gonna purposely make an error in my code. I am purposely making an error in my code. All right. Let's go in here. And let's just say that I wasn't paying attention. So I put 2 L's in there. All right. It may catch it in this, it may not. Okay. But I'm going to do a file, save all. Then I'm going to come back into here and I'm going to try to run it. Still opens. All right. Like I said, I think that this program is not totally operational. All right. But what's going to happen occasionally, do something like this, you're going to click, you're going to get an error message. It's going to happen. It happens to me all the time. It'll happen to you. You'll have to take my word for it. If that happens, if you remember when we were working, for example, on a CSS file, we bring up our developer tools. All right. And when we brought up our developer tools, so when we did this, it looked like that. Okay. And we've used this before. There's nothing new here. But what's new here is in JavaScript, we don't want to work with this stuff. We want to work with what's called the console. All right. And you'll notice that if we look in here, it's already giving me what's considered to be a couple problems in the program. All right. And it's just letting me know that there's a problem. All right. I just want to show you, all I wanted to show you here is we're going to be using the console. And you can use it as a debugging tool. It's not the only debugging tool you have. As far as whether or not it's the best, I don't know. All right. But I wanted to show you something else in here. You may or may not remember, but when we started to come in and we started looking at working with Visual Studio Code, one of the things that I showed you was if we come over to here, there's a thing called extensions. All right. Well, if I click that extensions and I come in here and I type in, I'm going to try JS to see what it gives me, if anything. All right. It's got JS refactoring. It's got a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm going to try typing in JavaScript and see if it finds anything. All right. There is some stuff that is built into this editor that you can add as extensions. Okay. Are you going to want to? There'll be 1 or 2 that we'll look at a little bit later. All right. Notice JavaScript debugger. Companion extension to JS debug that provides capability for remote debugging. That's something we may take a look at. But if you keep looking, there are literally that many different extensions for JavaScript. All right, so there might be something in there that we'll take a look at a later time. All right. The process of finding mistakes in your code or looking for mistakes in your code, that's known as debugging. All right. So if you've got an error in your code and you find it, you have found a bug. The idea is the earlier in the programming process you can find a bug, the cheaper it is to fix it. Now, if this had been some kind of an application that I was sending out to someone and it had an error in it, it would cost a lot more money to possibly, for example, to have to take the website down, to fix the bug, and then bring the website back up again. So we could be losing money during that time. All right. Whereas if I find it myself, it's a good thing. So you should actually look at it that when you're debugging a program, all right, that every error you find is kind of a success, right? Because you found it rather than somebody else finding it. All right. How to use Visual Studio Code to develop JavaScript applications. You know, you already know how to use VS Code. There really isn't anything new in here. I already brought this up in VS Code. All right. This open in browser extension, I never use that because we already have live server. And that's pretty much it. Now I can come in and I can Google, for example, best JavaScript extensions in VS Code. All right. And I'll find articles. 10 must have VS Code extensions for JavaScript developers. All right. So why am I not going over and showing you all this right away? I will tell you why. Because some of the stuff that's in here assumes you're already a JavaScript developer. So if we would start putting these in and explain them to you, I'm going to have to be explaining concepts that we're not going to be going over, some of them for maybe a few days or a few weeks. All right. So let's just jump into chapter 2. Get started fast with JavaScript. Notice what it says. The goal of this chapter is to get you off to a good start with JavaScript, especially if you're new to programming. Now, probably about 4 of you in this class, there's 13 of you in the class, but probably about 4 of you last semester took the AWD1100 C# programming class with me. All right. So you will already know some of this programming terminology because you've heard it before. That doesn't mean that people where this is your first class, oh, geez, I'm behind the 8 ball, I'm going to do terribly. No, not at all. All right. But would they have a leg up on you? Maybe at the start. All right. So as it says, if you have programming experience with another language, you should be able to move rapidly through this chapter. But considering 8 or 9 of you in this class don't have any previous programming experience, we're not going to rush through this. We're going to take it nice and slow. Plus, there are some differences in the way things in JavaScript as in the way you do it in C#. All right. So we'll go through everything that's in here. How to include JavaScript in an HTML document, some stuff on JavaScript syntax, how to work with data, how to work with expressions. All right. I would not have put this, how to work with objects, methods, and properties. I would not have put that this early in the book. So we will talk about it. But again, if it makes very little sense to you, please don't let it throw you. All right. And then finally, as it says, we'll go through 2 more applications. Miles per gallon, which pretty much everybody can understand, and a test score application. So we'll look at these 2 right here. And since we took since we took our break before and we ended at 9:10, I'm planning right now on going till 10:10. So I'm going to go for a half an hour. All right. And at 10:10, we'll take another 10-minute break. All right. So we'll see where we are at that time. All right. The script element I've already mentioned to you, but I'm going to say it again anyway. Now, this is where it's going to get a little bit confusing. I showed you how to use that script element and how to put it in your program. I've shown you, like they show you right here, how you can put it at the bottom And I've shown you how you can put it at the top as well. All right. Now, I'm just going to check something because it just made me think of this. That is, I'm going to go back down, and where we had this, I moved this as you saw, but I'm going to move it back down to the bottom right there. And now I'm going to get rid of the word defer. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run it again because I want to see if now it does find my errors. It still doesn't. All right. So something is goofy on this. Just want to double check that. Now, if you don't want to take your JavaScript and put it in an external file, you can put it right in your code. Notice that when you put it right in your code, like what's shown right here, you say script, but you don't say source equal, because the source is everything between the two script tags. This is considered, again, a poor way of coding, because what you're doing is you are putting your JavaScript code right into your HTML page. You should have this separation of concerns. That's what you should shoot for in here. You've already seen that with the CSS. All right. The only time I really showed you using that style tag for a CSS file or putting in some inline CSS was to show you what they were. Virtually 100% of the time when we use CSS, I put it into its own folder and into its own file. That's what you should do. And you should do the same thing with JavaScript. If you don't, you could get the reputation of being a sloppy programmer. All right. So as they say here, you use the script element to identify an external JavaScript file. All right. But if you don't, you can embed the JavaScript right in your HTML page, which is, again, considered bad practice. That just because it's bad practice doesn't mean that people don't do it anyway. I don't want you to do it, but you could get a job as a web developer, and if you had to maintain somebody else's code, there's probably at least a chance they didn't write it in the way they should have written it. All right. Now this no script, okay, I'm not going to go in and do it right now, but if I go way up here at the top, hopefully you can see my mouse going back and forth. I'm going way up to the top of the page, not to click that X, but right below it, these three dots. If I go in there, and then from under there, I go down to, I don't know which one it is, but there's a tool in here that you can use that you can literally turn off JavaScript. All right. Why would you want to do that? If you were doing a certain type of testing, you could. Or if you knew, hey, I'm writing this application, and the people who are going to use it, all right, they're very sophisticated users, and there's a chance they may have JavaScript turned off for whatever reason. All right. If you think there's a chance somebody could have JavaScript disabled on their machine, you can use a no script element. So in other words, when you go here, all right, when you go to the website and you've got JavaScript enabled, you'll get this. If you don't have it enabled, you'll get the error message. And it's really not an error. It's just telling you, hey, to get the most out of this, you probably want to go back in there and do that. All right. Now, really and truly, it's not that much of an issue today. All right. Because most people either don't know how to disable JavaScript or don't care or don't even realize that JavaScript is enabled, period. All right. So they show you in there, I guess I should have done that. So again, it's settings and then privacy and security. So somewhere in here, we've got a settings. There it is. And then there, privacy and security. They're in one of these. That's all I can tell you. All right. And I don't know where it is. syncing, turn off. I don't know. But if we go through these, you'd find it in there where you can turn off JavaScript. All right. And again, if you think that's an issue, you can put in that no script tag. All right. Okay. So now we're going to start looking at the syntax of JavaScript. What is syntax? It's the rules of the language. I mean, right here, if I grab this line that's right here, and I wrote down, if I read that to you as statements, syntax, JavaScript refers, rules, must, you follow, code, as you, etc., wouldn't make much sense. All right, because the syntax of the English language says you do things in a certain way. I mean, even as something as simple as, what do we have here? We've got a book. The book contains chapters. The chapters contain pages. The pages contain paragraphs. The paragraphs contain sentences. The sentences contain words, etc. That's syntax. JavaScript has its own syntax. One of the biggest things in JavaScript, and it's right here on your screen right now, in the top paragraph, JavaScript is case sensitive. So as it says, sales tax, and sales tax, notice that's got a lowercase t, that's got an uppercase T. They're two different variables. Now, if you remember, one of the things I showed you earlier was putting that use strict, all right, that we put at the top of the program. If you did not put use strict at the top of your program and you declared this variable, sales tax, but for some reason you accidentally did it like this in the program somewhere else, you would not get an error message. But what would happen is, as far as JavaScript is concerned, those would be two different variables. It probably would lead to an error somewhere along the lines. But if you declare this variable, and then later you use it like this, and you have use strict, it'll flag it as an error, and it'll say sales tax with a capital T has not been declared. All right, that's why you want to use strict. It makes you a better programmer. Second, as they say, most JavaScript statements, especially all JavaScript executable statements, should end with a semicolon. All right, it says to remind you to include semicolons. Many IDEs issue a warning if you omit them. Now, I will tell you with what they say right here, as far as JavaScript statements should end with a semicolon, I agree with it 100%. Those are client-side JavaScript statements. Next semester, those of you who take the AWD1000 class, and we start writing some server-side JavaScript, then it's more optional whether or not. Some people never put semicolons in when they do that. All right. So again, it just depends. The third rule, JavaScript usually ignores white space. All right. Kind of the same way that HTML did. If you remember, when in HTML, I created a paragraph for you weeks ago where we put stuff on 4 different lines. Like I said, hello there, how are you type of thing. And if you could put them on multiple lines, but HTML just ate that all up and put everything in there as basically a single space. JavaScript in many ways is going to be the same way. All right. Finally, and this is what we'd already mentioned, JavaScript has a strict mode. All right, that only allows you to do certain things. Or if you do something you're not supposed to do, as in if you declare a variable without a keyword, and those keywords are either const or let. All right, JavaScript will give you an error. But to do that, you must put that use strict directive at the top of your program, right here. In fact, I don't even put it where they show it. I put it at the very top. It's the first line that I put in. And notice here, because in the book earlier, they didn't show it with a semicolon. You can use a semicolon. You really should, but you don't have to. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about here, as you can see, are identifiers. And not to be funny, but they're used to identify something. All right. And look at identifiers as those are things you create. So an identifier is something you create. When you create something, there are rules that you have to follow, such as, and I think they'll show it in here. I don't know if it's on the next page or not, but JavaScript, there we go. That is what I wanted to show you, has somewhere around 60 words that are called reserved words. What that means is they have to be used in a certain way. You can see them right there. All right, and it right there looks like there's about 59 if I counted right. If you try to use these words out of context, in other words, not in the way they're supposed to be used, you're going to get an error. So in other words, if I tried to create my own variable and I decided I wanted to call that variable interface, I'd get an error message because I'd be doing something not in the way it's supposed to be done. All right. Okay. One of the things I wanted with you, and I want you to understand, and I want you to learn, is when you're creating your own identifiers, you should give them good names. All right. In other words, as they show an example here, monthly investment. That's not a bad name. You can look at it and pretty much tell what it is. MI is not a very good name. You might know what that means. You might not. And speaking of that, all right, one thing that JavaScript lets you do, not all languages allow you to do this, but I'm going to grab this right here and I'm going to put this in. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see what I'm doing. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in monthly investment. Okay. As opposed to monthly investment. Now, either one of these ways of setting up your own identifier is considered okay in JavaScript. I will highly recommend you use this one. And the reason for that is there are programming languages that do not allow you to do this and use that character. There are very few, if any, that I know of that don't allow you to do it this way. All right. And what that's saying is every time you start a new word, capitalize the letter of the first word. So if this was going to, be something like, this is my monthly investment. The only one you don't capitalize is the first one. Now this kind of doing it, setting it up like this, it's known as camel casing, because the idea is you're like the humps of a camel, big, small, big, small, big, small, big, etc. That's how it got its name. All right. Sometimes you're going to want to capitalize everything like that. That's called Pascal casing. You don't have to worry about that. All right. But I'm going to recommend that you do it like this, like this. Now, if you say, well, heck with you, I want to do it like that, then you're going to do it anyway. All right. It's okay. But I recommend you do it the other way, is what I'm telling you. So again, here's their rules. Identifiers can only contain letters, numbers, the underscore, and the dollar sign. What does that mean? That means no other special characters. When you're creating your own identifier, and we'll get into what identifiers are. They can't have a blank space. They can't have for example, an asterisk or parentheses or a percent sign. The only special character they can have is that underscore I already showed you and a dollar sign. I'm going to recommend that you don't put a dollar sign in your variables. All right? Because in some programming languages, the dollar sign has a very specific meaning. Also, I'm going to recommend that you don't put, if you're going to use underscores in your identifiers, don't start an identifier with an underscore. Usually when you start something with an underscore, it sends a signal to the person looking at it that is some kind of a system variable or a system file or something. In fact, I would recommend that whenever possible, you use letters, and if you have to put a number in there occasionally, fine. I just start everything with letters, and if possible, I use letters for everything. Now notice they are case sensitive. They can be of any length, all right? And they can't be the same as those reserved words I've already shown you. So they show you some valid stuff, all right? And, they will show you, if they aren't on this page, eventually they'll show you some invalid stuff. Again, there's camel case versus what they call snake casing. All right, these recommendations, they're good recommendations. Use meaningful names for your identifiers. I already mentioned monthly investment versus MI. Be consistent. Either use camel casing or use snake casing, but don't combine them. If you use snake casing, use all lowercase for all your letters. And again, these words, can't use them for your own identifiers. So again, an identifier is any name you give to a variable, to a function, to an object, to a property, or to a method. We haven't talked about most of those yet. We talked about what a variable is. I said we should be using const and let with those. We did look at functions in that last chapter. That program was broken down into 4 functions. We are not right now going to talk about objects or properties or methods. We will at a later date. All right. If you want to write comments, there's 2 ways. One is the same way we wrote comments in our CSS file. So a multi-line comment is usually made like this. Starts with a slash asterisk, ends with an asterisk slash. A single line comment is 2 forward slashes. So if on a line of my code, if I put in 2 forward slashes, everything that comes after the 2 slashes is automatically a comment. So you'll notice this is not, from here on, that is a comment. Since I put this one at the beginning, the whole line is a comment. All right. So the idea is, as it says, you use comments. My litmus test is always, hey, do I need a comment here? If I have to ask, I probably need a comment. You can also, while you're testing, if you know that a certain bit of your code, well, this might be broken, you can comment that out. All right, a block comment is a comment that's more than 1 line as opposed to a single line comment. Comments are ignored by JavaScript. All right. They will make your program run a little slower if you've got enough comments in there, and that's about it for that. All right, how to work with data. JavaScript has several different types of data. This is going to possibly be confusing. JavaScript has a data type called number. Those of you in the C# class last semester, we worked with int, we worked with decimal, we worked with double. To JavaScript, a number is a number is a number. Doesn't matter if it has a decimal place in it or not. Doesn't matter if it has a positive, a plus sign in or a negative sign in or not. All right. Strings. Strings are characters. Now, unlike C sharp, when you create a string in JavaScript, they can be within single quotes or double quotes. But if you start it with a single quote, it must end with a single quote. If you start it with a double quote, it must end with a double quote. Booleans are true and false. Symbol we're not going to look at right now, but we will talk about it later. Null means there is no value. I've given this example before. If you're a brand new student at Rankin and you walk in the first day of class and you introduce yourself to me and I say, I could never ask this anyway, but let's suppose it wasn't me, that there's two of you in the class that, just happen to be students. And one of you says to the other one, what's your GPA? And you say, I don't have one yet. I just started today. Your GPA would be null. It's not 0.00. That'd mean you're failing, right? And there's a fine line in here between using null and using undefined that you see right there. It'll hopefully make more sense when we look at some examples. All right, finally, big int, as it says, it's a whole number that's either really, really big or really, really small. And as always, they give you examples of the use of all these. Again, you'll notice with strings, both double quotes or both single quotes. Whenever possible, I recommend that you use double quotes for your strings whenever possible. Because in some programming languages, using single quotes means something else. Not in this language, but in some programming languages. Again, now you've seen at least numbers, strings, and Booleans. All right. Okay, again, a constant is something that you don't expect to change throughout the life of the program while it's running. Okay. A constant is a special type of variable. If you do expect the value of a variable to possibly change while the program is running, you don't use a constant. You use the word let. If you don't expect it to change as the program's running, you use const, C-O-N-S-T. All right. And when you read this, I'm going to show you something now that may or may not make any sense to you. But the way that you normally read this, you'd say, well, it's let count equal 1. Yeah, that's true. It is true. But what it really should be read as is take the number 1 and assign it to the variable count. Now, no one talks like that, but that's pretty much what's happening. You'll also notice if you look at this example right here, it's double quote with no space in between. That's called the empty string. All right, so that says assign the empty string to email. And that's how you'd read all of these. Now, if you look at the last example in here, let x equals 0, comma, y equals 0. I don't do things like this. I would make this let x equals 0, semicolon. Then on the next line, let y equals 0, semicolon. I was always taught that's a better way of coding than what they're showing right here. All right. Now there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff. There'll be a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to be doing in here throughout this semester that, especially when you're first introduced to it, may make very little sense to you. And honestly, that's okay. It really and truly is okay. All right. And sometimes I'll just say to you, you just have to wait. We're going to get into it in a later chapter, etc. But, again, I'm going over this stuff and I'm trying to hit everything. But it's going to be of paramount importance to all of you that you still go in and you look at the book. I don't try to skip things, but there's is it possible I am skipping something? Of course it is. All right, so you should still be following along and having your book, read the chapters that are in the book. How JavaScript handles variables and constants. All right. First thing that's in there, that first bullet might look confusing. JavaScript places all variables and constants in memories first. This is called hoisting. What you could look at it like this: no matter where you declare a variable, no matter where you declare a constant, JavaScript will always go and, for lack of better words, kind of move it up to the top of wherever you declared it. That's called hoisting it. Now, back in the olden days, like about 10 years ago, you could use let, you could use const, and you could use what was called var. All right, as you can see in that second bullet, don't use var anymore. Var leads to very bad programming errors. Now, is it still used? Yes, because some people don't know what the heck they're doing, or you've got code that's been out there forever and nobody wants to change it. But you should always use let and const whenever possible. And that's what they'll say in here. All right. Expressions. Well, believe it or not, you know what most of them mean. All right. When you look right here, you probably know what everything up till this point means. Add, subtract, multiply is done with an asterisk. Divide is done with a forward slash. Don't use a backward slash. It means something else. Modulus is the remainder operator. So if I said 10 modulo 2 times the 2 going to 10, the remainder is 0. So 10 modulo 2 would be equal to 0. If I said 10 modulo 3, it goes in there 3 times with a remainder of 1. So 10 modulo 3 is equal to 1. What most people have problems with, all right, are these two things right here. So I want to quickly show you the difference between those. Okay, I'm just going to go and remove this. Let's say that I create a variable. So I say let x, from a name, how about let age equal 12. Okay, if I want to add 1 to age, it's the person's birthday. I'm going to show you 4 different ways that I can add 1 to age. I can say age equal age plus 1. All right. There's a shortcut where I can say age plus equal 1, or I can say plus age, or I can say age plus. In this case, all of them do exactly the same thing. There's no difference. You're probably going to want to choose the last one or the one before it because it's less typing. Now, these only work, this plus only works if you want to add 1 to something. If I wanted to add 7 onto age, I couldn't do either one of these. All right, but I could do this, or I could do this. Okay. All right. I want to show you the difference between putting the plus at the beginning and putting the plus at the end. So I'm going to say let new age. I'm not even going to give it a value, so it has no value right now. Okay. Now there is a difference between this new age equal plus age and putting in new age equals age plus. There's a difference between these. This is called the pre-increment, and this is called the post-increment. What this does right here is it does 2 things. First, it adds 1 to age. So age is now 13. Next, it assigns the value of age to new age. So in other words, when we're done, both age and new age equal 13. That's in what's called the pre-increment. All right. Now let's look at the other one here. This one does it differently. This one first assigns the value of age to new age. So in other words, now both age and new age equal 12. Next, it adds 1 to age. So when you get done, now new age is equal to 12 and age is equal to 13. So there is a difference where you put the plus plus. And if you say, that's really confusing, then don't use it. Just don't do it. So if I want to do this, if I want them both to be the same, and I don't remember how to do that, I can just do this. I can say age, either plus equal 1, all right? Or I can say age equal age plus 1, or I can say age plus plus, or I can say plus plus age, any one of those, then just say new age equal age. So you can just do it like that. All right. What's happened is over the years, things get added to a programming language and they get added to hopefully make it easier to work with. But when people are learning, sometimes easy is not easy. Now, I just showed you the plus equals. There's a plus equals, there's a minus equal, there's a times equals, and why they don't show the rest here, I don't know. There's a divide equals, and there's a modulo equals. So you can use any of those as shortcuts if they help. It says it also offers these two, but you won't use them often. Probably it's true. All right. I promised you we take a break. We're already a little bit over. So let's come back, please, at 10:23. We'll finish up this chapter, and we're going to jump into chapter 3. I'll see you at 10:23. Right back. All right, it's 10:23, so I'm going to continue on. The next thing that's discussed in here is string concatenation, and that just means you're joining together two or more strings. All right. So for instance, if you've got this, const first name equal Grace, last name equal Hopper, and you say last name plus a comma space first name, you'd get Hopper comma space Grace. No biggie. There are other ways of doing this. They mentioned in here template literals. I am going to go over template literals, just not right now. My goal is not to throw the entire kitchen sink at you today. There's just so much to go over and there's so much to learn in here. All right, that I'd rather bring it to you slowly. All right, escape sequences, or as they say, characters. If I do this, if I go in here and key in something like this, let's say const name1 equals Jeff. Const name2 equals Mary. I don't know, something like that. And I put in here then something like this. Okay. If I end up saying basically, let's see, what do they use in here? I want to use the same thing they used. Of course, they don't show it here. Okay, I'll do it like that. That's fine. And if I do something like this, if I come in here and, whoops, I decide that I want to write them out onto the screen. Okay. And there's different ways that I can write them out. I'm just going to show you for now, at least, what I consider to be probably the easiest way of doing this. Okay. So if I come out here and say console dot write something like that, and I say name1, and then I do it again, and I say console dot write name2, that's going to literally write on my screen, Jeff, Mary. Well, if I decide that I want there to be a space in between there, okay, then I could come in and say console dot write name1 plus a space, and then console dot write name2. And as you probably guess, if I do it like that, then it'll say Jeff space Mary. But if what I want is to write Jeff on one line and Mary on the next line, then what I do is I put in something like this. That is a backslash. That means new line. That's the same thing as if you hit your enter key. So that would actually print out Jeff, Mary, like that. All I'm trying to show you is that character right there. All right. Now there's other ones as well, and they're going to show them in your book. So let's quickly take a look at them. All right, I'm going to move to the next page here, and here are some of them. I will tell you that you will probably almost never use backslash followed by a single quote, backslash followed by a double quote. They give examples in here of when you'd use those, but you almost never do it. The backslash, probably the only time you'll use that is in the C# class when you're showing where a file is located. Don't worry about it. But the one that's not shown there that you'd often use is instead of a \n, \t, because that'll put in a tab character. So I'm not going to go back, but if I wanted where I had Jeff Mary before, if I wanted Jeff tab and that, and then Mary on the same line, then instead of using that \n, I'd use a \t. All right. Now they talk about Unicode characters in here. I don't want to hit on that now either. All right. Why? Just because, like I said, you're really not going to be using this stuff the way they're showing it here very much, if ever, in this class. So I don't want to waste a lot of time with that. All right. This I'm going to hit very, very, very quickly because this is advanced stuff. We don't talk about objects and methods and properties until about chapter 15 or something like that in the book. All right. Object consists of methods and properties. Methods are functions that are written inside of an object. Properties are things that relate to an object. What does that mean? Well, let's suppose I created an object, a Jeff object. All right. I could say that Jeff object would have properties like eye color, hair color, height, weight, gender, etc. And the methods for a Jeff object could be eat, sleep, drink, etc. All right. And if you can just understand that for now, I wouldn't worry about it anymore, in until we get to that part in the book. They talk about how you call these things, etc. It's not really and truly that important. This is what I should have used before instead of that, right? I should have used an alert. All right. You're going to use alert a lot in here when we start because it's a real easy way of doing things. And then later, you'll hardly use it at all. All right. But an alert is a real easy way to bring up a dialog box and to be able to ask a user a question, or typically not ask a question, write a statement. If you want to ask a user a question, you use a prompt. So they're kind of reverse opposites of one another. Alert prints out a message, prompt prompts for something. So if we look in here, here's a prompt. This is a test of the prompt method. This is the test of the prompt method. The value you put in here becomes the default value. All right. And again, this stuff, probably at least, will make much, much, much more sense when you start seeing it in action. And that's why, like I said, tomorrow, that's what we're going to do. All right. Parse int and parse float. These are interesting ones too. All right. Parse int takes whatever you just entered and it attempts to convert it into an integer. An integer is a whole number. Parse float takes whatever it is you've been trying to input and it converts it to a decimal type, which means it can hold the decimal place. All right. Now, does that make sense to you? Maybe not at all. But one of the first programs we're going to write together tomorrow is going to use this. If you expect a number, so if I'm expecting a number, if I ask you your age, all right, and I'm expecting you to put in something like 23, but you type in there 23, but you type in TWENTYTHREE. So it's expecting a number and you put in a string. Then what's going to happen if when it tries to convert it, it won't be able to. And you get a special thing return that's called NaN that you can see right here. And NaN means not a number. So when you attempt to convert something into a numeric value, but what you put in there is not a number, you will get NaN, not a number. And again, I promise you, we're going to do a bunch of these things. So if that made little to no sense to you, it really and truly is okay. All right. How to use the write method? Well, this is what I showed you before, but I should have had document.write when I showed you those examples. That literally will write something right onto a web page. I'm going to say that again. You can use the write method of the document object to write something right on a web page. All right. So here with this document.write, okay, they put all this stuff in there. And as you can see, they're in there as document.write statements. This is not a great example. All right. Now, if I do something like this, if I come in and don't worry, I want to pick something that I think is going to work here. If I take 17 and divide that by 3, you can see the answer I get. Okay. If I do this in a JavaScript program, that's probably the same answer I'm going to get. But what if I don't want that? For example, what if this is dollars and cents and I want it to say 5.67? All right. Then what I can do is I can tell it how many decimal places I want with something that's called toFixed. That's something that's built into the language. So you'll notice it's a pretty good example they give right here with pi. And they say pi is 3.14159. It's actually, as you know, a lot bigger than that. But then they take it and they say, give it to me in 3 decimal places. So you'd think it'd be 3.1141, but it's not, because it looks at the fourth digit. And if that digit is greater than or equal to 5, it takes the third digit and it rounds it up. That's why we get 3.142. All right, we'll use this plenty in here. All right, so the chapter ends with 2 different applications. Notice what it says. These are not realistic applications because they get the user entries from prompt statements. Typically, you have a text box on a form. We'll get there, just not right away. So there'll be a miles per gallon program first. So let's look at that one. All right. So if you run it, you put in something that looks like this. It'll say enter miles driven. And if you put in 375, and then it says enter gallons of gas used, and you put in 12, the answer is going to be like 31, and then there'll be a remainder. So you should get about 31.25. Okay, so that's a pretty easy program. Now, a few things about it. It's not written very well. What do I mean? Ask the user to enter miles driven. That's in a prompt statement. That prompt that you see right there, enter miles driven, is this one. And then it attempts to take that and convert it into a whole number, an integer. But what if I put in there, what if I leave it blank? It's going to give me NaN, not a number. And the whole thing won't work. So what you'll learn in a later chapter is how to make sure the user, when you ask for a number, they put in a number. And the way that you make sure of that is if they put in something non-numeric, you just don't accept it. All right. And you'll learn how to do that a little bit later. Now, the only other thing that's in here, it's math. So you take miles and you divide it by gallons. Now we're doing a parse float because we want to keep this decimal place. All right. And when you look in here, we're saying we want it to show to 2 decimal places. That's why it's 0.25. Now, that may have made very little sense, but we're going to rewrite that program ourselves as we go on. And we'll take a look at it and we'll talk about what's good about it. We'll talk about what's bad about it. All right. Then the next program is this test scores application. So what is this doing? It's telling us to enter 3 different test scores. Okay. And then it's going to add the 3 test scores up and then take the sum of those 3 scores, divide it by 3, and tell us what our average is. Again, you might, well, that isn't too bad, and it isn't. Now, what's bad about the program? I don't believe they're going to check to make sure that the scores, for example, if these were a real test, are between 0 and 100. So what if I put in 68, 92 and I fat finger and I put in 843? Well, my average won't be an 81 anymore. It'll probably be like a 200 something or a 300 something. All right. So there's not a lot of checks that are put in here. In this example, they're using an external file. Right at the beginning, they're putting in use strict. And then notice they're asking you to enter 3 scores, but they're not checking. They're not doing what's called range checking. They're not checking to make sure that the tests that you input, the test scores, fall within some range. You will learn how to do that, and it's not difficult. Then total. So let's say that in here I run this. So total 0. It asks me to enter in a test score. Let's do it over here. So it comes in and it asks me to enter in a test score. So I come in here, it says enter test score. And I put in an 88. All right. So total is now going to be equal to 88. Then it comes back and again says enter a test score. And now I didn't do as well, so I put in 71. Now total is going to be equal to 88, which it was equal to there, plus the 71. Or in other words, it's equal to 159. Then it asks me again, enter test score. And I did real well that day and I got 100. So now it adds the 100. So it adds 81 or 88, I'm sorry, plus 71, which gives me 159 plus 100, which gives me 259. Then it goes in and it takes that 259 and it divides it by 3. All right, that's what's happening right here. So the average then is going to be what? 259 divided by 3, which is 86.33333, etc. So when we print it out, if we want to, doesn't show it right here, I don't think. Nope, it doesn't. Put a 2 fixed on there and done it to 2 decimal places, and then our average would have been like an 86.33. All right. It's a fairly simple program. Whether it seems like it is or not, it really is fairly simple. That's it for chapter 2. So I'm jumping right into chapter 3. I'm going to go for about 45 minutes. I'm going to go until 11:30. If we finish the chapter during that time, great. If we finish it early, we'll be done then. All right. If we don't finish it, I'll just pick it up there tomorrow morning. All right. So the essential JavaScript statements. All right. So conditional expressions, control statements. All right. 3 illustrative apps. Notice they have an enhanced miles per gallon and an enhanced test score app. They also have in here what some of you might find to be very confusing, and that is working with arrays. All right, so we're going to talk about all of these. All right, let's do it like this. All right, you saw this thing that said enter a test score. But if I were to come in after you asked the person to enter the test score, if I said something like this, if test score is less than 0, or test score is greater than 100, now I'm doing what's typically referred to as range checking. And I actually write mine a little bit differently. That would work just fine, but I tend to over parenthesize. So I'm going to do it like this. So what is this doing? First of all, you'll notice that in the middle here, we have this. That is the same thing as the word or. So this says if I put in a negative number or I put a number in that's 101 or greater, we're not going to allow it. So again, I'm doing what's referred to right there as range checking. It's not the same kind of check we looked at in the last chapter where you said parse int or parse float. That was attempting to convert something. Here I'm just checking its value to see if it falls within a certain range. With that miles per gallon program that we looked at in just a few minutes ago, we could have said, for example, if miles driven is less than 0, or miles driven, let's say the maximum we assume is going to be greater than 1,000. All right. I mean, that's a lot, but let's assume you have a 50-gallon gas tank, something like that. It's a truck, let's say, greater than 1,000. Again, that's a range check. All right. If what's on the left-hand side of the operator here is true, or if what's on the right-hand side of that operator is true, you will do something. Otherwise, you won't do it. Now, when you use this operator, what this is assuming, in this case at least, is either that's true or that's true. If I rewrote this, and this is going to be wrong, but if I replace this with 2 ampersands, this one right here, as I mentioned to you, is called the OR operator. That's the AND operator. I don't know, in my opinion at least, it's impossible to come up with a number that is both less than 0 and greater than 1,000 at the same time. But when you're checking this stuff, if you want to check if either condition is true, you use an OR. If you want to check if both conditions are true, you use an AND. All right, just keep that in mind because we're going to look at that in the chapter here. All right. Okay. So the first one they mention here is called a conditional expression. What does that mean? All right. That means whatever you end up putting inside of here for expression, whatever goes in there, all right, that's Boolean. In other words, it must be true or it must be false. And when you're checking for things, when you check for equality here, all right, you use 2 equal signs. When you check for inequality, it is an exclamation point followed by an equal sign. My hope is back in junior high, you learned greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Now, what's not shown in this table, JavaScript is fairly unique, all right, fairly unique in that they also, in addition to this double equal sign, which I almost never use, they have a triple equal sign, equal, 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 all right? And you say, well, what is that? I'm going to explain it to you when we get to that point, all right? But when the way that JavaScript works is when it's figuring out a value, literally what it does is it says that value I didn't make these words up, is either truthy or it's falsy. All right. And the reason I'm bringing up truthy and falsy to you is you are going to see that, if not in this chapter, in a later one. All right. Truthy means that it expects that it's true. Falsy means it expects that it's false. All right. JavaScript's words, not mine. So there's plenty of examples in here, but these are conditional expressions. All right. So it's something that has to either come back as true or as false. So if we looked at something like this, I'm going to keep it real simple. I'm not going to worry about writing anything out or anything. But let's say that I said in here, let age equal 12. And then I say, if age is greater than or equal to 18. Okay, we're going to have another let in here that's going to be called you can vote. And I'm going to assume I'm not even going to give it a value. So if your age is greater than or equal to 18, you can vote is equal to true. Else, you can vote is equal to false. Now, you're all bright people in here. You all can look at this and say, well, age is not greater than or equal to 18. So you can vote is going to be equal to false, and you'd be 100% correct. On the other hand, if I change this to 22, now 22 is greater than or equal to 18. So you can vote would be equal to true. That's an example, what I'm showing you right here, of what's called an if-else statement. If your Boolean condition is true, you do what comes between the curly braces. If it's false, you do what's in between the other curly braces. Now, I mentioned this to you earlier, but I'm going to say it again. What if we came in here and I'm going to do it, like I said, keep it real simple. Say let number equals 0. Now I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say if number equal 0. All right, I'm going to just write on the screen document.write 0 is neither odd nor even. All right, something like that. All right. Oops. Else, if number modulo 2 equal 0. Now I'm going to say document.write even number. And if it's not even and it's not 0, I'm going to say odd number. Now, if you can understand the logic of what I just wrote down here, I'm not really, I'm not kidding you. I'm not going to say this is as hard as it gets, but you're on your way to understanding what this is about. All right. So we're assuming here, I wouldn't do it like this. I'd read in a number tomorrow. All right. But if the number we read in is a 0, we write this. As soon as we find a match, we do this and we get the heck out. So we come down to right here, whatever's in there. We do that next. If it's not a 0 and we put in a 12, if number's equal to 0, it's not. So we come down to here. Is 12 divided by 2 give us no remainder? Yes. So we put even number. If we do this, it's not 0. It's not divisible evenly by 2. So we write odd number. Now, when we write this, you must have an if. You can have as many else ifs as you want, or as few, meaning I can have 0. I don't even have to have an else. So if I said if number is 0, do that. And if I took these and for right now, I removed it, now nothing's going to happen because 17 is not equal to 0. All right, if I bring these back again and I remove this else, again, what's going to happen? The answer is nothing because the number is not 0. The number modulo 2 is not equal to 0. And you'll notice when I'm making all my checks here, I'm using double equals. Now I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit just because I want to show you something. Okay. This works. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the way this is written, but I would write it like this. When you use two equal signs, all right, what you're doing then is you're checking for equality. Okay, and that's fine. But if I use 2 like that, if I do that, and I put in this, right? That's not saying is the number equal to 0. That's saying is the number equal to the string 0. Strings don't have a mathematical value. All right. But if I use that like written like this, it'll come back and it'll say 0 is neither odd nor even. If I put in 3 of these, and if this was actually 0, all right, now this will fail because triple equal says it has to be equal and it has to be the same type of variable. So here I'm saying number is a numeric variable, but here I'm checking it against a string variable. Now that's a little bit complex. So if it didn't totally make sense, you'll see it in a later chapter, but I'm trying to be complete here when I'm showing you this stuff. All right. So the idea is, let's just keep it the way it was. Oops. This will handle anything. And what I mean is this will handle any number. If it's 0, it's going to do this. If it's an even number, it's going to do this. If it's an odd number, it's going to do this. That's about as simple as it gets. And again, that, as I mentioned, if you use an if, you can have 0 or more else ifs. If you decide you'll have an else at the bottom, it has to go last, and there can only be one else. All right. Now, does it get more complex than this? Of course it does, because I can put an if statement inside of my if statement. All right. So there's a lot of ways that you can make this more complex than the way it's being shown, is what I'm telling you. So those were your 6 relational operators. Double equal, exclamation point equal, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. I showed you an additional one, which was the triple equals. There is also an exclamation point equal equal. All right. So again, those are relational operators. It's how one value relates to another. There's also logical operators, and I've already shown you 2 of those. The 2 ampersands for and, the 2 pipe signs, which is right above your enter key for or. There's also a not that you can put in there. All right, so here's an example again of an and. This says if the age is greater than this and less than this. So in this case, the age must be between 18 and 69. Here is an or, which says if you put something in that was non-numeric, or you put in a number less than 0. Finally, there is the exclamation point, and that's known as an inverter. It takes something that's true and it makes it false. It takes something that's false and it makes it true. It inverts its value. All right, or reverses it. Now, you can have very complex expressions where you've got some ands, some nots, and some ors. So which one do you do first? You do your nots first, then you do your ands, then you do your ors, unless you don't want it that way. And if you don't want it that way, you use parentheses. All right, because parentheses will always be done before any of these. And again, you are going to see some examples of this as we go on in here. All right, the basic control statements, the if is what I just showed you. All right, so there's if age greater than or equal to 18, alert, you may vote, else alert, you are not old enough to vote. So if I put in an age greater than or equal to 18, it'll show one message, otherwise it'll show another message. Now I could put 1,000 in there. We're not doing range checking. We're just checking to see if you are greater than or equal to a certain age. We're not saying, are you between 18 and 130, or however the oldest person would be. Here's again when you've got a bunch of else ifs. Again, as soon as the system, a case in there that matches, it'll do that alert and it skips everything else. So if you left it blank, it would do that first alert. You did not provide a number for the rate, and it would skip the check for less than 0. It would skip the check for greater than 12. It would skip the final else. All right. Again, as mentioned, you can make these as complicated or as complex as you want to or need to make them. All right. This I mentioned earlier. Okay. So here's 3 ways to test if something is false. I've never seen that middle one. It looks stupid to me. But if is valid equal false, or if exclamation point is valid. These two are the same. If is valid equal true, or just if is valid. So the second one here and the third one here, they're just shortcuts. All right. If it confuses you, do it the long way. It's okay. All right. The next thing that's in here are loops. Easiest way to show you loops is like this. I'll show you all 3. So I'm going to come in here and say int. And I don't want to say int there. That was my fault. That's let. All right. And I'm going to say let. What that's going to print out literally is 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, start with 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, let's figure out why that's the case. First of all, LCV stands for loop control variable. It's the variable that's going to control how many times I go through the loop. All right, so when I first start, my loop control variable is 0. Is 0 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. All right, there's actually a mistake in my code, and that's good. All right, because I'm going to show you why why it wouldn't work. Okay, so it's going to come in here and it's going to say result equal result, which is 0 plus a blank space. So there's nothing in results. It'll be a blank space plus 0. Right now, what's going to happen is if I don't change this, I've got to add another line here. What's actually going to print here is this: alert, result. And what's going to print here is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. It's going to keep going. Why? Because I'm not changing this value. I am not allowing this to reach 10. So I'd have to come in here and say, for example, not result, LCV plus plus, or I could say, so I could say plus plus, or I could say E, or I could say LCV plus equal 1, or I could say LCV equals LCV plus 1. So why am I telling you this? Well, what is this doing? This line is doing what's referred to as line that you see right here. This is initializing the loop control variable. This line that's right here is testing the loop control variable. And this line right here is changing the loop control variable. And if you can look at that and wrap your head around what that means, you're on your way to understanding all this. So LCV is what's going to change whenever the program runs. It's the variable that is going to vary while the program runs. So it'll start at 0. Once I do this, it's now 1. When I run it again, then the next time it'll be 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9, then 10. And it'll print out all this. Then it'll add 1 more to it, so it'll be 11. And is 11 less than or equal to 10? No. So it'll come back out and it'll print that out, just like that. All right. Now, there's 2 other ways I can write this loop. I'm going to show you all of them. And I'm going to leave this one up here. And I'm going to grab everything that's in here. And I'll write the other one. But one thing before I do. I'm not asking because I don't want anybody to ever, think that, well, I'd answer your question, but if I'm wrong, I'm going to look stupid. But if I do this, you want to guess how many times it's going to go through the loop? The answer is 0, because 11 is not less than or equal to 10. So it'll skip it. And since I set result here to the empty string, it'll just print out nothing, the empty string. This is called a pretest loop because you come in and you test the value of your loop control variable before you go into the body of the loop. If it's true, you do it at least one time. If it's false, you never do it. That's what a while loop is. But I'm going to come down here now and write one that's similar to it, but that's not the same. This is going to be called a do-while loop. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to replace it with the word do, and then I'm going to come down here and paste that in. This will give the exact same output, but I'm not making the check until the bottom of the loop. So if I set this equal to 11 right here, this would print out 11. All right. That's assuming that I put that, I guess, into here. The point is this. With this loop right here, this loop, all right, that checks the value of my loop control variable before I go into the loop. This one will check the value of the loop control variable after I went through the loop once. This will always run one time at least. This may never run. Again, if that is false, like when we put 11 there. All right. So those are two of the looping mechanisms. All right. But there's another one. All right. And I'm going to, again, copy this stuff, but it's a little smaller. It's called a for loop. All right. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of all that stuff here. And I'm going to say for let LCV equals 0. Now you'll notice if you look at this, I get the same output, but it's much more concise. And it's much more concise because when you write a for loop, let's try that again. I want to get that up. Oh, there you go. When you write a for loop, you initialize, test, and change the value of your loop control variable all on the same line. So a for loop will result in you writing less code. How many lines did I have up here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many did I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What you'll also discover when we get a little bit later on in talking about this is there's different kinds of for loops that you can write. For now, don't worry about that even a little bit. All right. So they show you in the book pretty much what I just showed you. There's the while loop, and they print from 1 to 5. There's the do while loop when they go from 1 to 5. And then there's the for loop where they again go from 1 to 5. So these are the same things that are right here that I just showed you. All right. So some logic into the program. So let's take a look at the example, starting with this enhanced miles per gallon program. Now they've used a do while loop in here, which is okay, but they're going to let you run the program multiple times. And you'll notice they say enter miles driven, and they say enter gallons of gas used. All right. If you entered a positive number for miles or miles driven, and you entered a positive value for gallons used, it'll figure out your miles per gallon and it'll write it on the screen. If either miles was less than 0, less than or equal to 0, or gallons was less than or equal to 0, or you put in something that was non-numeric, it's going to say one or both entries are invalid. But regardless of whether this works, because you put in 2 valid entries, or it doesn't work because you put in 1 or more invalid entries, it'll ask if you want to do it again. So I could keep entering values, whether they were valid or not. I could continue to keep entering values into this program as long as I wanted to. All right. All right. The next one that's in here, for whatever reason, if you've ever dealt with enough Muroc books, any Muroc book that uses any kind of actual logic and math, they always put a future value in there. What this says is if I invest $10,000 and I do it at an interest rate of 7.5 per year, and I do that for 10 years, that basically whatever I put in there, my initial investment amount will double. All right, say that again. It says if I put in this amount right here, and I have this interest rate, and I do it for this many years, that's how much I'll have after that many years. All right. And then they write this one. Now, what I find interesting about the way the authors did this is the fact that they're using do while loops. And most programmers will tell you they don't use do while loops very often. They're using them here, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with using them here. You could not use a for loop here. All right. You can only use a for loop. It's called a counting loop as well, because you can only use a for loop when you know how many times you're doing something in advance. You could have used a regular while loop there, which is what I would have done. All right. Then finally, they have this enhanced test score application. And now what you'll notice, I know what I told you before. The score is valid. Now, remember before I did it the other way. I said if the score was invalid, so if it was less than 0 or it was greater than 100, and we handle it this way. Here they're saying if it's valid, meaning it's between 0 and 100, then we'll add it. And again, they've done this within a do while loop. Now, you don't have to do this before tomorrow, but one of the things I want to show you tomorrow is all 3 of these programs. All right. And you can break these. For instance, what if it came in here and asked for a score that blank? All right. Well, if I leave it blank, it's not going to fall into here, so it's going to come down here. And it'll check and it'll say, did you put in a -1, which is what we're using to end the program? Nope, I left it blank. So it's going to come back and say, score must be a valid number 0 to 100. And it'll ask me to do it again. This will keep going until I put in a -1. Once I put in a -1, it'll fall out. It'll figure out how many tests I put in or inputted. That's count. It'll figure out the total score, which is total. It'll divide total by count, and it'll give us an average score. All right. So in this case, it's put in 4 values, and they were all valid values. So again, score will be equal to 89 plus 99 plus 78 plus 91. That'll be the total. All right. And The actual score itself are going to be those. Total will be this, plus this, plus this, plus this. All right. So what you're starting to learn in here, and this is what I'm trying to get across to you, what you're starting to learn in here is how to implement logic into something that you're doing. All right. And that's what we are going to be doing. All right. So again, if we look in here, I mentioned this at the start of class and not everybody was here then, but I want to say it again. There's two things of exercises in here. There are short exercises and there are what are called extra exercises. You don't have to do either one of them. What I used to do up until this semester is I used to do the short exercises for the class and then assign the extra exercises. Well, Mr. Gudmested has decided that these aren't good enough exercises. So I'm going to do these 3 tomorrow for you from scratch. Then I'm going to do these 5 for you tomorrow from scratch. All right. And then we will talk about what your actual assignments are. So what are those? You actually have them in your stuff. Let me show you what I mean. All right. If I go over, this is the same thing you got at the beginning of the semester. All right. Homework. There's a thing here that's actually called JS homework. And you'll notice if you look, there's nothing for chapter 1. Chapter 2 has got this. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This is fairly hard. I'm going to let you struggle and try to do that. All right. Now, where they say here, he's making it worth 100 points. No, I'm not going to make you struggle for 100 points. No, I'm going to make this first assignment that I want you to try on your own worth 10 points. So even if you can't get it at all, you'd lose 10 points, but I will do it for you, just not today. After it's due, I'll go over it with you. All right. Now, that's what you do for chapter 2. Now, for chapter 3. This is the assignment. 40% of the basic JavaScript course, submit a screenshot of your completion. Well, what the heck is that? This is the better way of teaching it, according to what they decided last year. So I'm going to go out to here. And you'll notice it's free code camp and JavaScript algorithms and data structures. If we look from the top here, this is basic JavaScript. There are 113 lessons in here. Before you go, my God, I can never do all those. I'm going to just show you one of them. You run through this. They tell you what to write. You write it down in there, and then you go on and you run the test. If it works, you go on to the next one. And then what happens is you'll get that colored in. And this will say 1 of 113. Well, you're supposed to create or do 40% of these, which are 45 of 113. All right, so you are to go through that. And Friday will be a lab day, so you should be able to do it. All right, so that's for chapter 3. All right, the other thing that's there for chapter 3 is this. It says create a website with your favorite anime characters, etc. And I wrote above that, this will not be due until later in the semester. I am not going to expect that you understand arrays yet. I am going to go over arrays with you. We will write several programs using arrays as a class. What's an array? All right, well, as an example, what if I wanted to do something like we've been doing in here, but let's say I have 5 students. So let's say I've got a class with 5 students, all right? And I want to be able to work with those 5. Well, I could come in and say here, let's say let student 1, how about stu 1 grade equal 56. Let stu 2 grade equal 99. Let stu 3 grade equal 88. Let stu 4 grade equal 77. And let stu 5 grade equal 100. Now, you can look at those. Again, you're all bright people. You could tell who had the highest grade. You could tell who had the lowest grade. If you either sat down with paper and pencil or used a calculator, you could add the 5 grades together, divide by 5, and get the average grade, etc. But what you should notice looking at that is there are 5 grades. There are 5 different variables. The other way I can write something like this is to say this. I'm going to just call this stu grades equal bracket, bracket. Then I can come in and do this. This wouldn't be let anymore. I'm not expecting this to make a boatload of sense to you right now. The difference between, the first example and the second example is here I've got 5 different variables. Here I've got one variable with 5 different components. And if that confuses you, think about it like this. This is how I used to explain it. Think about it. I mean, when I moved to Missouri, my wife was still living in Illinois because I had a daughter going to college at the time. So I had an apartment that I lived in for a couple years, and it was an 8-unit apartment. I was in unit 1. So I was in unit 1. Somebody else was in unit 2, somebody else was in 3, etc. Now, when you work with arrays, the first unit isn't called 1, it's called 0. What the reason that this is important and the reason that arrays are important is basically twofold. First of all, you can use arrays in virtually any programming language. Second of all, can you imagine if I had to do this and I had 100 students? All right. I mean, I could sit there and just say, I could put it in some kind of a loop, but if I put it into a loop, I have to make 100 loops, or I've got to put in 100 variables. But if I do this, and now it has 100 students in it, all I'd have to do would be something like this. I would say for let LCV equals 0, LCV less than 100, plus LCV. Now I can come in here and I can prompt, I can say, enter a grade for this student. All right, something like that. And then I can say that grade, so I could say, for example, I could say stu grades LCV equal. Now, again, do I expect that to totally make sense to you? No. But what's going to happen is it's going to run this 100 times. And the first grade that I put in there will be stu grade 0, And the last grade I put in there will be Stu grades 99. Now, I'm not checking it. I'd still have to validate it that the grade was between 0 and 100. And if it wasn't, I'd have to just do it again. But all I'm trying to tell you is, first of all, arrays like this and for loops work hand in hand. All right, very well together. And second, writing code like this is going to take, and instead of you having to write hundreds of lines, it'll turn it down to tens of lines. So it'll make it that much nicer for you. All right, so to finish up, we've gone over the first 3 chapters. We're going to go over tomorrow. That's all we're going to do are examples. I'll do all the ones that were shown, but I'll do some of my own as well. All right. I'm not putting them into any kind of a repository or anything else, but they'll all be out there for you to take a look at. Now, some of you came in a little later today, so I do want to mention, go back to what we talked about at the beginning of class, and that is this. I did not go over hot number 3 because there's still a few people who have not turned it in. All right. So as it says, I'm going to go over the test Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. If you have not turned in hot 3, which is the one on Flexbox, by then you'll get a 0 because I'm basically going to do it in front of you. It's not fair to anybody else. If you turn it in by then, you'll lose points because it's late. It's quite a bit late. But even if you get a 50, 50 is better than 0. All right. Then, speaking of tests, all right, I said this in the tape and I said this in the email. You were given 2 Bootstrap tests to work on. All right. You were given 3 lab days to work on them. All right. If you have questions and don't understand something, this is no joke, okay? Please do not wait until Sunday evening at 9 o'clock to contact me. If there's something that doesn't make sense, ask right away. All right? But what I did for you, because a couple people had emailed me saying they were still having a little bit of trouble getting started, so I gave you a template that you could use. That's what that 27-minute lecture that I did for you, that's what that was designed to be. That's it. It was not a code along. It was not, oh, you're supposed to do it exactly like this. No, it was supposed to do the type of things that you were supposed to do. All right. All right. So tomorrow, as it says, again, I'm going to go over those short exercises and those extra. As it says on here, you will not be responsible for doing these. All right. You will still be responsible for turning in the written tests we go over and homework like what I just showed you. All right. Wednesday, I will give you a pretest for chapters 1 to 3. I will tell you the pretest will be much harder than your test that you will take on Thursday. Why would you do that, Jeff? Well, because if you can understand that, you should be able to bang through the test on Thursday in a half an hour to an hour. All right, so I will pass that out on Wednesday. I will email it to you at 7. We will go over it, okay, from 8 until 8:20. Then you will have an hour and a half to work on it. And beginning at 10 o'clock, I'll go over it. There'll be 2 problems on it. I will do both of them for you. All right. And then finally, as it says, your first JavaScript test, hands-on test, JS Hot 1, will be Thursday. There's, I think, 3 problems on it. I could be wrong. I don't remember. I will email you the test again by 7. We'll go over it from 8:05 till 8:20, and it'll be due by midnight that day. Most of it is almost ridiculously simple, and I'm not just saying that. Friday will be lab for the entire period so that you will have time to work on the written test for 1 to 3 and for those 2 assignments that I just showed you. Those being this one, complete 40% of the basic JavaScript, and this one, which you might struggle with mightily. It's okay if you do. That one will only be worth 10 points, not 100, as they said there. I'm not trying to I want to make sure that people pass this course. All right. So again, Friday will be lab for the entire period. I will not accept Flexbox tests after 8 a.m. Wednesday. I will not accept Bootstrap tests after 8 a.m. Thursday. I'm not going to go over the Bootstrap, but I'm trying to be fair because a good half the people in the class did turn in their Flexbox tests on time, turned in their Bootstrap tests last night. I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to set, I'm trying to set due dates, etc., that I think are fair. You may or may not agree with that. All right. So the first JavaScript hands-on test, I don't know what that 9 is there for, but again, it'll be given Thursday and due by midnight on Thursday. All right. Then finally, your JavaScript homework, chapters 1 to 3, will be due by midnight on Sunday. And the last thing I'll say, because I said it this morning, but again, if you came in late, all right, approximately 2 months from now, you'll do course evaluations. If you think I'm unfair with the amount of homework I give, when the due dates are, the way I grade, whatever, when you do the evaluation, it's a 3-pronged evaluation. It'll ask you about the course. All right. In our course, one of the things that we had in there were the course objectives. If you look on the syllabus, did I meet the objectives? Did the course meet the objectives? The second thing is, did the books, were they good books for helping you meet the objectives? The last thing is, evaluate the instructor. I never see your evaluation. So if you want to rag on me, that is your chance to do it. All right. So get ready tomorrow as soon as you come in, because I'm going to write, at a minimum, I'm going to write 10 different JavaScript programs to get you started with this stuff. And as I said, when I say 10, there'll be these 3, there'll be these 5, and before we do this, I'll do like a starter one that'll be very short, and then maybe after we do this one, I'll do a longer one. All right. If we do that in 2 hours, then you'll be done at 10 tomorrow. If it takes as long as this one, then you'll be done at 11:35 tomorrow. All right. If you have questions, again, ask me those questions as soon as possible. Email me. My class this afternoon is taking a test, so I will be online this afternoon. If something doesn't make sense, I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. All right. With that said, have a good rest of the day. I will see you then at 8:05 tomorrow. Thanks.